Hello, I'm Annie Graham Larkin, Executive Director of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. Welcome to Warren Ballpark with historian Mike Anderson. Thank you to our program sponsor, the Arizona Historical Society, as well as our members and donors who enable the museum to provide free online programming and fulfill the organization's mission to discover history, explore Bisbee's past today. To learn how you can assist the museum in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. Today and every Saturday at 2 p.m., the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum offers the Stepping Back in Time walking tour with former museum curator Boyd Nickel. During this one-hour walking tour of the historic district, you will learn about the mining camp's rich history. Spaces are limited and reservations are highly recommended. To reserve your space, visit bisbeemuseum.org. On February 10th, the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum will host the free online program From Princeton to Playas, Phelps Dodge from East to West with Dr. Katie Benton Cohen. Please visit the events section of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum's Facebook page for more information. Okay, Mike Anderson is the author of Warren Ballpark, a work that delves into the rich history of the playing field. He is also the historian and founding member of the Friends of the Warren Ballpark in Bisbee. And if you would like to ask Mike any questions during the program today, please type your questions into the Q&A chat box. We'll gather those questions to share with our speaker at the end of the presentation. And also a link of the recording of today's program will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, I would like to welcome Mike Anderson. Thank you for being with us, Mike.
Thank you for hosting this, Annie, and thank you for everybody that is signed into this Zoom presentation today. I want to tell you about a fascinating place that most of us pretty much take for granted in Bisbee because it's been here for so long and it's just part of our landscape, but it has an incredible history. What I've done today is title this or subtitle it History Hiding in Plain Sight, because Warren Ballpark is just part of the everyday Warren landscape, but it's got a fascinating history to it. We're going to share that history today. What I'm going to start with is a general overview of the ballpark in terms of its historical significance and it's the most important events that have taken place there. And then we're going to go into some of the things that we've learned about it since my book was published in 2013. And again, if anybody's got any questions, we're more than happy to do my best to answer them. And I promise that any answer I give you will be as true as I can make it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And what its significance of this ballpark is that, number one, it's the oldest surviving venue for a Major League Baseball game in Arizona. In just a few weeks, there's going to be thousands and thousands of people converging on Arizona for spring training, and they're going to be paying a lot of money for tickets in what are essentially spring training ballparks. Most of those folks have no idea that Major League Baseball started here well over a century ago, and we'll get into that today. It's the last surviving venue for outlaw league baseball in the Southwest and the oldest surviving minor league baseball park in Arizona. It's the oldest surviving field where Buffalo Soldiers played baseball in Arizona, and it has a strong connection to Camp Naco and Fort Huachuca. It's the oldest surviving venue for soccer and rugby in Arizona, and this is one of the things I think that really surprises people because we tend to think that soccer and rugby are recently introduced sports into Arizona, and it's just not the case. Of course, we have the longest running high school football rivalry here in Bisbee, share that with Douglas, and it's also the oldest high school baseball field and maybe the oldest high school football field still in use in the state. And it's also the principal site for one of the most significant conflicts between labor and the copper industry in American history. So this ballpark has a tremendous historical significance, both in sports and in history in general. It's also architecturally the only um, the only baseball and football uh, um, clubhouse and grandstand constructed out of raw adobe and known in the United States. It's also been the site of, or the place where hundreds of minor league ball players have played and hundreds of major league baseball players. So let's go ahead and get started. Warren Ballpark was built in 1909, 1 year after the Warren town site was constructed. And we all know that Warren was constructed by the Calumet and Arizona Mining Company, Calumet and Arizona Mining Company in 1908 as a planned residential community. It was inspired by the City Beautiful movement. And one of its selling features at that time was that all the homes had bathrooms, indoor plumbing, electric light, and running water and sewers. But when it was constructed, the place where the ballpark was originally intended to be was planned as a large plaza with a lot of public buildings. And within a short amount of time after the two men that put together the plan with the help of the Warren Company in Duluth, Minnesota, when they presented their plan, the Warren Company owners, the subsidiary of the Calumet in Arizona, decided that that's not really what we need. We don't need a plaza with public buildings. What we really need is a ballpark, because at that time, the closest ballpark to Bisbee was in Don Louis, which is located about 6 miles to the west of Old Bisbee. And today, Warren Ballpark anchors the southern end of the vista. And the vista is the linear park that bisects the midsection of Warren residential neighborhood. And it's a linear park that has also a tremendous historical significance and maintains its significance today, because as we speak right now, the Saturday market, which is a large and very vibrant farmers market, and crafts market is taking place in Warren. So the World Tour came in 1913, 1914. This is the earliest baseball game played at an existing ballpark in Arizona. There was a game played the day before in Douglas, but that ballpark is long vanished. But what happened was that the New York Giants and Chicago White Sox owners and managers got together after the season ended in 1912 and decided that they were going to plan a world tour that would start in Cincinnati, Ohio, the birthplace of professional baseball, and would go across the United States by railroad. And when they got to the West Coast, would embark on a passenger liner and then start traveling across the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, Mediterranean, and then back to the Atlantic Ocean and back to the United States. And these two teams, the Chicago White Sox and the New York Giants, both had a lot of players that, surprisingly enough, did not want to take a trip on a passenger liner a year and a half after the Titanic sank. So many of the players that were actually on the teams begged off, and it wasn't part of their contract. They were replaced by all-stars from all over the National League and the American leagues. So both of these teams were just absolutely stocked to the brim with talent. And when they came to Bisbee on November 7th, 1913, and came to play at Warren Ballpark, we had 6 future Baseball Hall of Fame inductees on the field at once, and Olympic gold medalists who had participated in the pentathlon and decathlon in 1912 in Stockholm, and won gold medals in both of them. Jim Thorpe was on the field that day too. And at one of his at-bats during the game at Warren Ballpark that was played between the Giants and the White Sox, Jim Thorpe hit a home run over the center field fence. Those two teams traveled from the West Coast to Yokohama, Japan, Manila in the Philippines, to Melbourne, Sydney, Australia, and then to Sri Lanka. From there, they went to Egypt and played a game under the pyramids, then across to Italy, and the Roman Catholic members of the team got an audience with the Pope. They went to France, played a game, and then they played a command performance exhibition game for Edward VII, King of England, and then returned to the United States by passenger ship Lusitania. So this is a ballpark of historical significance because it's the only surviving venue, only ballpark left where the World Tour took place in the United States. The Sydney cricket grounds are also being, of course, maintained. So there was a game played there as well. But this is the only one in the United States where the World Tour was played. And these two teams you can see over the side, the team in the white is the New York Giants, led by John McGraw. And over on the right is the Chicago White Sox, owned by Charlie Comiskey. So the Black Sox played in Warren as outlaws at the Warren Ballpark. And when I talk about outlaw baseball, we're talking about non-sanctioned baseball. In other words, this is not part of the network of official major league and minor league baseball teams. And outlaw baseball came to Arizona. Today, we would call it independent league baseball. In those days, it was called outlaw baseball. And it was definitely frowned upon by the commissioner of baseball, Kennesaw Mountain Landis. It came to Bisbee in 1926, and this league was based in southwest New Mexico. So there were teams in Hurley, Chino, Fort Bayard, and at times there were teams in Juarez, there were teams in El Paso, a team in Douglas, and a team in Bisbee. And the players on this team, or on these teams in this league, included 4 of the 9 players that were kicked out of Major League Baseball for their alleged roles in fixing the 1919 World Series. And you often hear of the book and the movie 8 Men Out. Well, there were actually 9 men out because there were 8 men on the Chicago White Sox team. And the commissioner of baseball threw in Hal Chase for his role supposedly in fixing the World Series. My suspicion is that he was blackballed from playing in the major leagues and minor leagues because he wouldn't follow at that time, the system that they had to keep players in perpetuity, the reserve clause, which was sort of a form of slavery for Major League Baseball players, minor league players. The league disbanded in 1928. It was very, very popular. They paid wages comparable to those paid by Major League Baseball, and they attracted players from all over the West Coast and the western part of the United States, as well as those members of the Chicago White Sox and Hal Chase were implicated in the Black Sox scandal. The league disbanded because the commissioner of Major League Baseball came out here in 1927, the winter of 1927, to El Paso, and made a deal with the owners of the league that if they got rid of all the outlaw players, the ones that he had officially banned or were blackballed from playing in organized baseball, he would introduce minor league baseball, sanctioned baseball into southwestern New Mexico, or into New Mexico, Arizona, and West Texas. One of the most interesting things about this league was that one of the players, who was a young man from Bisbee, who during the summer times played outlaw baseball in order to finance his college education, was a young man named John Button Salmon, who was an outstanding catcher and a major league prospect. Of course, later on, he became an icon at the University of Arizona and the source of the bear down legend. Bear down is a baseball term that a catcher uses to tell his pitcher, focus, get yourself in the game, put everything into striking the batters out and getting out of this inning. That's where bear down comes from. The photo on the left is the 1927 Bisbee Bees, also known as the Bisbee Miners of the Outlaw Copper League. And in the middle is a fellow, front row, a fellow named Tony Antista, who was from Arcadia, California, and who was one of the finest baseball players in minor leagues and a batting champion. We also and one of the most fascinating things about Warren Ballpark, and it's connected to Camp Naco and Fort Huachuca, is that a number of teams from the 24th, 25th Infantry Regiments and the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments were stationed at Fort Huachuca, Camp Stephen D. Little, and Camp Naco. They played baseball games, exhibition games, not league games, because black teams were not allowed to play in white leagues. But they played a number of exhibition games starting in as early as 1917 and lasting until World War II at Warren Ballpark. One of the most exciting discoveries that we made in recent years was finding out that a pitcher named Carl Lee Butch Glass, who was a lefty, originally from Lexington, Kentucky area, and he was assigned to the 10th United States Cavalry in the spring of 1920, came from the Philippine Islands, from the 9th Cavalry. When I was doing research on Warren Ballpark and looking up early Bisbee baseball, I noticed that there was a Bisbee or a Fort Huachuca pitcher named Glass. Every time he pitched, would beat Bisbee teams, no matter whether it was the town team or minor league mining town company teams or whatever teams they were, he would beat them. So I looked him up just to see who this Glass fellow was in the Negro Leagues Encyclopedia. And lo and behold, found out he had a lengthy career as a player and manager, starting in 1923 with the Memphis Red Sox and going on to both pitch and manage in a number of Negro Leagues teams. And in 1942, Carl Lee Glass, who was already a World War I veteran, reenlisted in the U.S. Army and became a two-war veteran. So Carl Lee Butch Glass was not just a very fine pitcher for the 10th U.S. Cavalry, the original Buffalo Soldiers, but it was also a true patriot serving his country in two wars. The team that you see in this photo here on the left side of the screen is I Troop of the 10th Cavalry, and they were an outstanding team. They won their regimental intramural championship, and each one of these teams rotated in and out of Camp Naco from Fort Huachuca, where they would patrol the border at Camp Naco. And when they were down there, they'd play either games at Warren Ballpark or on the field down at Camp Naco across from Wilson Road. And this is Carl Glass as a St. Louis Stars pitcher after he was traded to them. And this is an advertisement that appeared in the paper for a game with the Bisbee team against the regimental team for Fort Huachuca. So Carl Glass was a pitcher for both the regimental team. It was an all-star team from all the cavalry troops in the 10th Cavalry, and was also a pitcher for Troop L in the 10th Cavalry when he was stationed at Camp Naco. A lot of major leaguers started their careers in Warren. Ballpark was a venue for minor league baseball starting in 1928 after the outlaw leagues were banned. And it became part of the Arizona League, and then shortly thereafter, the Arizona-Texas League, because the league included El Paso, Texas. And the minor league teams at Warren Ballpark consisted of 15-player teams. One of the players was also the manager, and he was generally either a former major leaguer who could no longer compete on that level, but was still healthy and adept enough to play on the minor league level, or he was an outstanding minor leaguer on the West Coast in the Pacific Coast League, or had some other kind of skill set that made him still a good ball player, but also capable of doing a couple of things that a manager has to do, which number one is to take the young players that he gets sent to him and polish their skills and develop them as players so that they can hopefully move up the ladder so that they will play in the major leagues at a future date. And the other thing is to get people's interested in the team, to win games and get them so that the community supports them, and as the manager would say, put butts in seats and make money for the team owners. So the minor league teams in Bisbee were affiliated with a number of major league and Pacific Coast League teams. Pacific Coast League along California, Oregon, Washington, sometimes British Columbia, and sometimes at that time Utah. But The minor league teams in Bisbee were affiliated with the Los Angeles Angels of the Pacific Coast League, Chicago Cubs, Cincinnati Reds, Yankees, and the Brooklyn Dodgers. And the way it worked was if a player started on a team and he was healthy enough and smart enough to listen to his manager and develop his skills, he might move up the ladder. So each year, one or two or three of those 15-man teams would move up from Class C, which was what Bisbee's level was. It was pretty low level minor league, up to Class B, or skip up to Class A, or even up to Double A if they're good enough. And if they continue sharpening their skills and stay healthy and lucky, then they might find themselves in the big show, either for a lengthy career or, as we say in baseball, a cup of coffee, a brief time in the major leagues. So Bisbee, and this is something that blows people away when I tell them, did you realize that Bisbee or Bisbee Douglas, because sometimes the two cities shared a team and half their home games would be played in Bisbee and half in Douglas, the same league with Phoenix and Tucson and El Paso and Juarez and Albuquerque and other larger communities, it just blows people away to hear that. But it's true. And the reason for that was Bisbee was much larger, much more economically important and politically important back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And Tucson and Phoenix and El Paso and Juarez and Albuquerque were much smaller. So they were more equal in size. The team on the left, this is a picture from the Spalding Official Baseball Guide. That's the 1938 Bisbee Bees, one of the best teams to appear on the field at Warren Ballpark. Fella in the front row at the far left is Roy Partee, who moved up the ranks to the Chicago Cubs and then was traded to the Boston Red Sox in 1946. Caught several games for the Red Sox when they played in the World Series against St. Louis Cardinals. And in the middle row, third from the left, and he's kind of looking to his left, our right in that photo is Jesse Flores, who was the first Mexican-born pitcher to make it to the major leagues. Bisbee had a very, very strong influence on Major League Baseball because we had players that went up from the Bisbee teams onto all 16 of the original pre-expansion Major League teams. And some of them had careers long enough, started playing in the 40s and 50s, to go up to the expansion teams in the 1960s. And please notice that all those guys are wearing caps that say LA on them. And that's because Bisbee, the Bisbee Bees, were the development team for the Los Angeles Angels, who would every year have tryouts in the Southern California area, and the best players that they could find, rookie players, would be sent to Bisbee to develop their skills. English ball sports were played at Warren Ballpark as soon as that ballpark was opened. During the springtime, we had, in summer, baseball. The fall was American football, and then winters the ballpark was used by English-speaking immigrants to play rugby and soccer. So we know that as soon as the ballpark opened in the winter of 1909, an English-speaking soccer league was formed here in Bisbee, and there were 4 teams. And the team that you see in that photo on the left of the screen is Lowell United, and it was made up, of course, from English immigrants, Scottish, Irish immigrants from Lowell. There was also the Bisbee Homers, which was more from the Johnson edition, other parts of Lowell, the Tombstone Canyon Stars from the old Bisbee area, and then Roman Catholic players, a lot of them played for the Knights of Columbus, which was sponsored by St. Patrick's Church. And every Sunday, there'd be soccer and rugby and cricket across the street at the Vista. And all these teams continued to play until the early 1920s. The members or the fellows that played soccer wanted to introduce it into the school district, and they went in front of the school board, and the school board turned them down and said, sorry, we don't want rugby or soccer. We want American sports to be played. Of course, these days, you know that soccer has become an extremely popular sport in the United States as it is worldwide. And soccer came back to Bisbee and to Warren Ballpark, AYSO, the American Youth Soccer Organization, and then also Bisbee High School has a co-ed soccer team that uses Warren Ballpark as its home field. If you look at this photo that was taken in front of the old Copper Queen Hospital, which was located just to the east of where the Queen Mine RV Park is today, you'll see a couple of faces of people peering out the front entrance of the hospital. I love this photo because it really shows, number one, how physically fit these young men were, and also how young they were. These men came over, most of them from Cumberland and Cornwall, to work in the mines or to have some kind of job associated with the mines here in Bisbee, and then on their day off, played soccer. Of course, Warren Ballpark is also the home of the Bisbee Pumas, and it has been so since 1909. So I'm pretty sure that it is the oldest continuously operated high school football and baseball field in Arizona. We haven't found any that compare to it in terms of age. On the left is a picture of Hadley Hicks, and Hadley was a running back for the Pumas in the 1950s. He was a high school All-American, both football and track, and that's a daytime game. I believe that's the Turkey Bowl right there. When they used to play the Thanksgiving game against Douglas every year, and if Bisbee won that game, it could make up for having a losing season. But if they had a really good record and lost the Turkey Bowl game, these guys had a very, very hard time after the game at Thanksgiving dinner explaining what happened. On the right is one of the many Bisbee High School state champion teams. We've had 5 so far, starting in 1947 when Pete Bukurovich, Bakerville boy, pitched the Pumas to their first high school state championship against Chandler at Rendezvous Park in Mesa. And every year the Pumas, or almost every year, the Pumas are in the playoffs. And every game that they play is well attended. Many of those games are played at night because Bisbee's one of the very, very few high school baseball fields that has a set of lights that they can play night games at. The ballpark is also historically significant because of one particular event that took place in 1917, and that was the Bisbee Deportation. It was an event where approximately 2,000 men who were organized by the Cochise County Sheriff Harry Wheeler at the behest of the mining companies and other businesses in Bisbee, rounded up an approximately equal number of striking miners and other people that were deemed undesirable in the community. And after collecting them at gunpoint, marched them down to Warren Ballpark and held them there until all were collected, and then most of them were given a choice to either return to work, renounce unions, and remain a loyal company employee to one of the mining companies, or to leave Bisbee ostensibly forever. The two people in these photographs here on the left, appropriately on the left, is Frank Little, an organizer for the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, the Wobblies. Frank came here in May 1917 to organize the IWW union, and he left before the deportation. He warned the union members that it was a bad idea to go on strike during wartime and that they should wait. They ignored him. He left. He went up to Globe, was injured in a traffic accident along the way. And from Globe, after he recuperated from his injury as much as he could, he went to Butte, Montana to organize up there. And while he was in Butte in August 1917, he was kidnapped from his boarding house, dragged out, beaten to a pulp, and then dragged face down behind a car for considerable distance, and then hanged from a railroad trestle. So that was his fate. And we learned about his story through Jane Little Botkin's book on Frank Little. The man on the right is Walter Douglas. At that time, he was the head of the Copper Queen Consolidated Mining Company. He was also the president of Phelps Dodge. So he was a very powerful and influential person in the mining industry. He was one of the sons of James Douglas, who was instrumental in bringing copper mining to Bisbee, and who helped develop mining industry in Cochise County and all over the Southwest. And Mr. Douglas was as anti-union as Frank Little was pro-union. And they symbolize the two factions. So organized labor, militant organized labor on the left, and in reaction, anti-labor copper companies and business interests and political interests here in Cochise County. On the morning of July 12th, the posse, who I call the vigilantes because they were acting as extra legal law enforcement officers, rounded up about 2,000 men that they had on lists of men that were on strike, and also other people that were either union organizers, union members, or in some way incurred the wrath of the planners of the deportation. And in the photo on the left, you can see that the grandstands are completely full with strikers and the men that were rounded up, the deportees, we'll call them. And there were still hundreds of them left. So they just corralled them right behind or right in front of the grandstands around home plate area, and then surrounded them with a cordon of armed guards. There were also machine guns reported present. Supposedly 5 machine guns had been obtained and were also deployed around the ballpark. There were no deaths at the ballpark. There were 2 killings that day. One was one of the vigilantes, a shift boss named Orson McCrae, worked for the Calumet, Arizona Mining Company, who was shot while leading a squad of vigilantes to a boarding house in Upper Lowell. He was shot either by his own people or by James Brew, who was in the boarding house. He wasn't on the list of men to be rounded up, but he'd come to the door with a pistol. And what happened after that is we'll never know for sure. But it ended with both Brew and McCrae being killed. Those were fortunately the only 2 men that died that day. It could have been much worse. In the photo on the right, you can see vigilantes who are wearing white armbands made from handkerchiefs to distinguish themselves from the men that were going to be rounded up and deported. And they are loading the deportees into 23 cattle cars. Once they get them into the cattle cars, after those that decided that they wanted to go back to work were called out, the remaining 1,186 men were placed in those 23 cattle cars and taken to Columbus, New Mexico, where they remained for 2 months and were never supposed to return. Some of them did. We know that there's at least 30 buried at Evergreen Cemetery. But this deportation caused an incredible rift in the community, a rift that continues to this very day, with some folks who are firm believers that it was justified and others who believe it was not. One thing we can safely say about the deportation was due process was not used. There were no formal arrests made. There was no appearance before a magistrate. These men were given a choice: go back to work or climb onto the train, and that was how they were treated that day. 2 things happened during the deportation that are very important to remember. Number one is that no one, either a striker or a deported person, a deportee, or a vigilante, was found guilty of any crime that day. The deported men who returned to Bisbee to pick up their possessions or just came back because they thought it was the right thing to do or to get their families were arrested at that point and charged with either vagrancy or incitement to riot by the squads of vigilantes that operated checkpoints for several weeks after the deportation to keep the men from returning. None of those men were actually convicted of a crime. None of the men that participated in the roundup and that took the train to Columbus as guards or that planned the deportation were ever convicted of a crime. Only one was put on trial, Harry Wooten, and he was found innocent by a jury. In Bisbee, only one of the deportees, Adolphus Embry, was actually put on trial, and he was found innocent by a jury in Tucson. The deported men did file class action lawsuits with lawyers that were provided for them by the IWW. They received a cash settlement sometime in 1920, I believe, and some of them started businesses or bought homes with the money that they received. The deportation continues to be studied, and one of the things that was truly fascinating for me to learn about this was the class differences between the two groups. The deported men were mostly unskilled, mostly immigrant labor, and the men that took part in the deportation were mostly native-born, skilled, professional. So doctors, school teachers, the school superintendent, politicians, police officers all took part in rounding up the IWW and other striking miners and men that were rounded up. So that's the story, essentially, of Warren Ballpark. It's been used as a sports venue for many, many years. It was used as a venue for Wild West shows and rodeos. Almost any outdoor event that took place that required a large venue was held at Warren Ballpark, and it remains that way today. So the Blues Festival, the Mariachi Festival, high school graduation, and Easter egg hunt, just about anything in the past, merchants' fairs, silent movies that were too long to show in theaters, just about anything that required a large outdoor venue was held at Warren Ballpark. Now, history's not static. Just because we know certain things at one point in time doesn't mean that we're not going to learn more things. So since the Warren Ballpark book, and this is the book, and I think it's pretty good. The only significant error that we found was I say in the book that Frank Little was deported from Bisbee, and he wasn't. But other than that, it stands up pretty well. And one more thing I'd like to mention about the historical significance of it. Warren Ballpark had a presidential candidate speak at it as well. So Eugene V. Debs, who was the socialist candidate for president in a number of elections, 1904, 1908, 1912, 1916, 1920, Eugene V. Debs spoke at Warren Ballpark during the 1912 presidential election as the socialist candidate. Debs was a very popular candidate with miners, and in 1912, which was the first election after statehood, because Arizona became a state in February 1912, it's the first election that Arizona voters were able to select or vote for president. Mr. Debs received more votes in Arizona than the incumbent, William Howard Taft, received. So it's kind of significant to think about that the man who actually beat Taft in 1912 in Arizona spoke at Warren Ballpark. So let's take a look at some other things. So one thing that we learned was that in the early days of Warren Ballpark, and you can see in this photo here on the left that there's a long line of cars parked inside the ballpark. That's the third baseline to the east, and over to the west, the first baseline and an equal number of cars parked inside the ballpark. So you could buy a ticket and sit in the grandstands for 50 cents. You could sit in the bleachers for 25 cents, or you could spend $1.50 and park your car inside the ballpark. The question I always had was, why in the world would anyone ever want to park their car inside a ballpark during a baseball game? A line drive is going to possibly take out your windshield. Pop-up foul ball or a ball that's misplayed and bad throw could put a dent in your car or come in and hit you in the head if your window's down. So why in the world would somebody want to park their car in the ballpark? We thought about this for a long, long period of time and couldn't come up with a plausible answer. Somebody said once, well, what about, did they turn on their lights? Well, horizontal lights like that wouldn't be very useful for playing baseball. What it would do would be to blind the players and fans. And we also know that there were no games played at night. There were no lights at Warren Ballpark, no stadium lights until 1938. So it was a mystery until Dr. Rob Schoen and Becky Orozco, and Rob was anthropology professor at University of Arizona, specializing in Mediterranean Bronze Age cultures on Crete. And Becky Orozco is the retired anthropology and history professor at Cochise College, organized a scientific archaeological dig just a few years ago, 2016, I believe it was. And they used anthropology, archaeology students from Cochise College and advanced placement students from Bisbee High School to do the work, and taught them how to conduct an archaeological dig. And you can see those students from Bisbee High School and Cochise College there working together. And these guys really got into this project in a big way. They got excited about it when they'd find something. They just got all jazzed about it, and it was really cool to watch them do it. So why were cars parked inside the ballpark? We found that one of the things that they discovered at the ballpark was fragments of mixer bottles for like club soda, quinine water, and things like that. And on the left, you can see one of those mixer bottles that they excavated. And on the right, a beer bottle. And they also found mason jar fragments. Mason jars were used for bootleg whiskey or other alcoholic beverages that were produced by bootleggers during Prohibition. Arizona voters approved Prohibition that went into effect January 1915, 5 years before the country as a whole went through Prohibition with a constitutional amendment. What that meant was that you couldn't legally consume or buy alcohol without a doctor's prescription in Arizona. So people couldn't drink in the stands. But if they parked their cars inside the ballpark, nobody paid attention to what they might have sitting there underneath the dashboard or on the seat beside them in a paper bag. So we know that people were consuming alcohol in the ballpark during Prohibition from 1915 to 1928. And we have evidence of that from the fragments of glass bottles and windshield fragments also that they found. Evidently, some of those balls that were hit by players during the time they were parking their cars inside the ballpark did strike windshields and shatter them. So the mystery of why people were allowed to park their cars in the ballpark until 1928 was solved. Once the minor leagues came in, they said, we're not doing this anymore, and insisted that no one be allowed to park their car inside the ballpark. And from that point on, that practice ended. And there's Eugene Debs, I was telling you about earlier. And there's an advertisement that appeared in the Bisbee Daily Review that indicated he was speaking at Warren Ballpark on September 8th, 1912. And he was jailed in 1918, not for not for inciting a riot, not for doing anything that would ordinarily be called illegal, but during World War I, there were two laws passed. One was the Espionage Act, part of which is still in effect, and the other was the Sedition Act. which made it a crime to disparage the flag, the conduct of the war, the president, just to say anything negative about the country or the conduct of the war. Eugene Debs was a pacifist and believed that war was immoral and that this war, World War I, was wrong. He spoke his mind about it, and he received a 10-year sentence as a result. And he was pardoned by President Warren G. Harding in 1921 after he served a year of his sentence in Atlanta Penitentiary. Here's something else that we learned after the book was published. There were very few of the deportees who were actually IWW radicals. They were all painted as wobblies and dangerous bomb throwers and people that hated the country by the company-owned newspaper. Phelps Dodge owned the Bisbee Review at that time, and also by other newspapers. The fact is, very few of them were actually any radicals. They were joined the Union for bread and butter issues. This fellow on the left with a cigarette in his hand was definitely a radical. He was German-born Kurt Wilkins, who came to Bisbee in 1917 to work in the mines. He had immigrated earlier and had joined the U.S. Army and been dishonorably discharged for desertion from the U.S. Army. He also served in the Prussian Guards in the German Army after being conscripted before that. After he was deported from Bisbee in July 1917, he went up to Globe, and while he was there, he made some negative comments about the war and was arrested because he was an enemy alien, a German during wartime. He was put in a detention camp in Utah, Camp Douglas, on Christmas Eve or early Christmas morning when all the guards were probably either intoxicated or not paying much attention. He and another man escaped, and there was a nationwide manhunt for him. He was called a crafty German spy, which he definitely wasn't a German spy. He was himself a pacifist and a radical labor union member. He was deported from the United States after he was recaptured, and he went to Argentina, where he assassinated an Argentine colonel who had ordered his men to fire on striking workers and killed hundreds of them. He killed that colonel and was later murdered by a relative of the colonel. So he was one of the few radicals that were actually in Bisbee during the IWW strike and the deportation. And here's another one, Thomas Graves. He was deported from Bisbee and from the U.S. as an undesirable alien. He went to Africa and was involved in labor movement over there, and then returned to Cumberland, England, where he died in the 1950s. And the Finns, the population of Finns that existed in Bisbee up until 1917 was almost wiped out during the deportation. Finns were very radical. They'd been under Russian subjugation for many years, and I don't think that did much in terms of making them feel good about governments and oppression. So they were more than happy to join the IWW. And the fellow that's in the photos on both the right and the left, and in the left-hand photo, he's on the far right. On the other photo, of course, that is Ed Dahl, D-A-H-L. Ed's baby, which is sitting on his mother's lap in the photo on the left, was born July 12th, the day of the deportation. Ed came back from Columbus, New Mexico in September after the camp was closed for the deported men in Columbus. And this picture was taken as he gathered together his family and to leave Bisbee forever. And if you'll look over his head, you'll see an IWW pennant, one big union. That's the Wobblies. So I guess it would be safe to say that Ed Dahl was an unrepentant member of the IWW. There were no Finnish names in the 1917-1918 Bisbee City Directory. They'd all been deported. A few Finns later worked in Bisbee, but all the ones that were there during the deportation were cleaned out. And the man that was hired by Phelps Dodge to photograph the or not Phelps Dodge, but the deportation planners in 1917, George Dix, later became a lawyer, became a friend of Governor George Hunt, Arizona governor, for many years, 7 terms, I believe. And in the 1930s became a high-powered Wall Street attorney whose sideline was defending anyone that couldn't find a lawyer because they were unpopular and nobody wanted to represent them. In 1938, he defended a accused Nazi spy, female Nazi spy. And later on in life, and that's his picture on the right there, George Dix. Later on the right, Mr. Dix, who photographed from start to stop the Bisbee Deportation. Later on in life, he defended men and women nobody else wanted to defend. Um, my sense is that he had a twinge of conscience after he took part in the Bisbee deportation by serving as a professional photographer of the event. Of course, we know the ballpark was featured in Bisbee 17 in the year 2017. Robert Greene, who is in the photo on the right, he is the second person from the left in the photo. I'm the last person on the right. You can probably tell by the shine on my head. And that's Fernando Serrano, in the picture on the left, who was the principal character in the movie Bisbee 17. It was a docudrama. It received very high critical acclaim during the Sundance Film Festival and in New York Times and other newspapers where film critics who saw it said this is a must-see movie about a little-known event in the American West. So if you get a chance, if you haven't seen it, I would recommend that you do. It's a good movie. I was supposed to have been the principal character in the movie, but Robert Greene wisely realized too old, too ugly, can't act, and got the participation of Fernando, who is a far better actor and far better looking than I am, and far more charismatic. A Bisbee baseball player in 1920, 21, and 22. His name was Frank Iman, and Frank is in the back row of the photo on the left with all the Tucson cops holding guns captured from the John Dillinger gang in January 1934. He's the fourth from the left, third from the right, and that's Frank. In 1920 and 21 and 22, Frank was a center fielder and right fielder and shortstop for the Bisbee semi-pro team, the Bisbee Colts. He would spend his winters in Joliet, Illinois, working on the railroad, and his summers and springs playing baseball in Bisbee. He married a Warren girl in 1918. He came out to Arizona originally as a cavalryman during World War I, and he stayed in Arizona, became a Tucson police officer in 1928, 1934, when the TPD found out that the Dillinger gang was in town after a fire at the Congress Hotel, and firemen who carried down some heavy trunks from the third floor of the building, when thumbing through a True Detective magazine, said, "Hey, that was the Dillinger gang whose luggage we carried down." Tucson Police Department managed to isolate each one of these gang members and take them down without firing a shot. And these pictures, that's John Dillinger, Harry Pierpont, who was far more dangerous than Dillinger, and Charles Mackley. The other person that's not in this picture is Russell Clark. Frank Iman, and this is Frank in 1950 when he was running for Pima County Sheriff. Frank was instrumental in taking down 3 of the Dillinger gang and later became Pima County Sheriff for 2 terms in the 1950s and then became warden of Arizona State Prison and was such a tough, iconic prison warden that Hollywood used him in 2 movies, including one with Jim Brown and Gene Hackman, to play the warden. Casey Stengel, greatest manager of the New York Yankees, won 5 straight World Series rings, 1949 through 1953, brought a traveling team here in 1920, and played Bisbee both at the old county fairgrounds in Benson, and then a game in Warren Ballpark. And this man, Harry Althouse, our next door neighbor, Christine Rothery's uncle, struck Casey out in the second game. The catcher dropped the 3rd strike, and Casey, being Casey, ran to third base. The Bisbee manager protested, said, "You can't do that." And Casey said, "Show me where in the rules where it says you can't." And by golly, all it said was if the catcher drops the 3rd strike, the runner can attempt to reach the base. Didn't say which base. Anyway, Casey was a clown, and he brought his major league all-star team to Warren Ballpark in 1920. And today, of course, Casey's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Fatty Arbuckle was here in 1909, and he was a big baseball fan, and he would go out to Warren Ballpark and umpire games. Um, he was a beloved person. He spent 7 months playing at the Orpheum Theater at the head of Brewery Gulch. In 1921, he was arrested and put on trial for um, manslaughter for a woman who died at a party in Labor Day 1921 and destroyed his career. Roscoe Arbuckle, Fatty Arbuckle, was the second biggest box office draw behind Charlie Chaplin in the second part of the teens and into the early 1920s. And then his career was destroyed by the incident in San Francisco with a woman's death. This is the first baseball Bisbee player we know that made it to the big leagues. He was signed in 1911 by Nap Lajoie of the Cleveland Indians, and he played for 13 years in both the American League and National League. And as I mentioned earlier, the Los Angeles Angels sent their most promising young players to Warren Ballpark. That's John Carpenter, 6'6", 240-pound pitcher from upper northwest British Columbia. And that is Charlie Moglia, the Bisbee manager in 1938. And we know that the Bisbee Copper Kings weren't integrated until 1951. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947 for the major leagues, but the Arizona-Texas League, where Bisbee Douglas Copper Kings played, did not integrate until 1951. And the players that integrated the league or integrated the team for Bisbee Douglas, Cliff Prelow and Lacey Curry. Cliff Prelow was from East LA, and Lacey Curry from Denver were treated horribly. And I actually contacted Cliff Prelow a few years ago, very old man. He was so much like Jackie Robinson, Army veteran, college graduate, really outstanding citizen. He was treated like a dog here. And when I talked to him, he said, I want nothing to do with you. I don't want you to ever call me back. So think about how horrible that man was treated, that bitterness would continue for some 7 decades. So that's the story of Warren Ballpark. So not just what's in my book, which I hope you buy if you have it. You can buy it at the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum, and also what we've learned afterwards. So for more information about the ballpark, buy the book or schedule a tour or go to our website or our Facebook page. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to entertain.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was absolutely fascinating. And we do have questions for you.
Hey,
The first is from Thomas. He asks, what is the actual distance in feet for hitting a home run in center, left of center, and right of center? This would be without the temporary fence that is used for the high school games. And lastly, he wanted to mention that his father's pictures are in your book on pages 107 and 108 from the 29 Pumas football team.
excellent. Excellent. Those were some pretty tough guys. Thomas, the distance to straightaway center is 444 feet. That's a big boy ballpark. So it's one of the largest ball yards in the United States because it was used for both football and baseball. The distance down the side, left field and right field foul lines is 385 feet. That's a big ball yard. And I know I could never hit a home run out of that. I had a hard time hitting a ball out of the infield, but Jim Thorpe hit a home run over the center field fence November 7th, 1913.
All right, our next question is from Susan, and she says she has a photo from the archives at the University of Arizona of her grandfather, John Twomey, age 17 years in 1895, as part of the Tombstone and Bisbee baseball teams. And so she was wondering, would this be considered an outlaw team? And that she had not heard of this before, so thank you for the information.
Well, actually, that was before they started playing professional baseball at Warren Ballpark. Those are probably town teams. So those were teams made up of young men who were professional, merchant class, and working class men that loved the game. And they would just get together on weekends and play for fun. And didn't really get organized baseball in Bisbee um, until the outlaw leagues came in the 1920s, and then the minor leagues. But there were leagues like semi-professional and amateur leagues out here long before that.
Our next question is from John. He says the museum, and I'll interject, Dolores in the research library, did research on his family from 1917 to 1920. Dolores provided an article about the ball field and a game between local bankers and the CNA team. And he was curious if you know anything about this. And also to clarify, is the CNA team a Calumet team?
And most certainly is. That would be Calumet and Arizona Mining Company that was um, started here in 1899 as Lake Superior and Western Development Company, and then became the CNA in 1901. That was the second biggest operating company in Bisbee, and also that was the company that developed Warren Townsite and built the Warren Ballpark. And yeah, I very well might have something, and I can look it up and get with Dolores and see if we can find anything else about it. But the CNA and Phelps Dodge and the Shattuck, Arizona company all sponsored teams of copper miners um, for many, many years, as well as the minor league teams and the outlaw league teams. So baseball was huge here. It was really the only spectator sport for many, many years, other than high school sports.
Our next question is from Camilla, our friend in Ireland, and she's asking, when did Phelps Dodge own the Bisbee Review, and for how long did they own the local newspaper?
I'd love to know the answer to that myself. They didn't just own the Bisbee Review in 1917. They also owned the Douglas International, and they also owned the Arizona Daily Star, which is the only daily newspaper left in Tucson and the preeminent newspaper in southern Arizona. I think they got out of the newspaper business in the 1920s. They divested themselves of a lot of different things, including the railroad, during the time when, after World War I, when economics or the economic situation was a little bit more difficult, and they needed their capital to keep the copper mines going.
And our last question is there a way to get prints of some of the ballpark photos?
Yes, there is. This is a shameless plug for the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. One of the ways that you can do that is to contact or go online and look up the photos, and you can put in keywords like Warren Ballpark or baseball or football or whatever the sport is that you're looking for, and you can get photos that way. And of course, there's a fee, but the photos are top quality and they're really easy to obtain that way. And the other thing you can do is contact me. I've got a number of photographs. What I won't do is bootleg photos from the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum, because I want to keep your on Annie's good side. But I do have photos that I've obtained myself that I'm happy to share with you. We also have a number of soccer photos that our next door neighbor, Christine Rothery, was generous enough to share with us. So if there are things that we can share with you, we will, but also you can get things from the Mining and Historical Museum archives, which are massive, incredible resource.
Thank you for the plug, Mike.
And buy my book.
Yes, at the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. And a
Exactly.
link to our website to purchase a copy of Mike's book will be included in the follow-up email that we will send out later today to all of our Zoom registrants. That email will also include the recording to this program in the event you would like to watch it again, or if you missed a portion. And it also includes a link to the Friends of Warren Ballpark website, and a plug for them. Their Copper City Classic will take place on April 6th and 7th, and tickets will go on sale soon. So please support that organization, which in turn helps support and preserve the ballpark. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your knowledge with us, Mike.
And thank you for hosting this. I think this is a wonderful resource for anyone who's interested in Bisbee history, or anyone that's interested in the things that have taken place at Warren Ballpark. And hopefully, when you drive by the ballpark or you go there for any kind of an event, it'll make it more meaningful now that you've seen this.
And thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us today. We hope to see you again for our next online program on February 10th. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Adios.